Hello, my name's Josie, and this is one of a series of Wednesday reflections from Woodchurch on the Wirral. And today I'm thinking about how we find God at work in our lives in these extraordinary and difficult times. How are you doing with that? Maybe you're one of those people who's finding it easy at the moment, perhaps easier than ever, to notice God alongside you. Or maybe like me, you're one of those who's struggling more with that at the moment. What I'm finding helpful is an ancient prayer called the Examen. The Examen is a daily prayer where we look back over the previous 24 hours and try to discover in it those places, those times when God has been present. We ask the Holy Spirit to guide us as we look back over that time, looking for those places where we've been warmed and lit up by God's presence, and offering thanks for those times. And it also helps us to look at the times when we weren't conscious of God alongside us, and to offer those times to God in prayer as well. I do recommend it as a way of praying. And I think that it fits in nicely with the readings from the Eucharistic Lectionary this week, which focus on the life of Elijah in the first book of Kings. I think that story of Elijah tells us that there are so many different ways in which God interacts with us and walks alongside us. I'd just like to look at a few of them, starting at the beginning of chapter 18. The first person we meet in chapter 18 is someone called Obadiah. And Obadiah is a faithful man of God who risks his life to help Elijah. And Obadiah reminds me that there are many Obadiahs in my life at the moment for whom I need to pray. People who put their own lives on the line, their own safety on the line, in order to provide the services that we need during these hard times. And one way in which I think we encounter God in our lives just now is in those Obadiahs. So you can read about Obadiah at the beginning of chapter 18, which at verse 17 moves on to one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's the story of the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, in which God intervenes in the most spectacular and extraordinary way, sending fire from heaven to set alight an altar which Elijah has soaked in water and surrounded with a trench of water, a huge display of God's power, which has an amazing effect on the people who witness it. Well, many of us can look back on events in our life where God has intervened in an extraordinary way, perhaps not as public and as spectacular as this one, but it is something that we need to look out for and recognize and give thanks for in our lives. The rest of the story of Elijah in these chapters actually doesn't focus on spectacular, miraculous events, but on things which are perhaps easier for us to recognize in our everyday lives. After the amazing miracle on Mount Carmel, Jezebel, the wicked queen of Israel, sends people out to look for Elijah and hunt him down and kill him. And Elijah withdraws into the wilderness and endures a period of deep depression. Here, at his worst moment, Elijah receives practical help. There he is, lying down under a broom tree in chapter 19, verse 5, when he's touched by an angel who tells him to get up and eat and provides food and water. The angel comes again and reminds him that he needs to eat in order to survive during the long journey that lies ahead of him. Well, in Elijah's story, this practical help, this good advice comes from an angel. But I think we all know that that could just as well have come from a human being through whom God is working to help us, to comfort us and to strengthen us. And maybe there are episodes like that in your life at the moment for which you could give thanks today and in which you could recognise the hand of God at work. That story of the practical help and comfort and advice is followed by a really famous Elijah story, one that we all love and which we remember from the hymn, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. It's when Elijah encounters God during a storm and finds God not in the wind and the fire and the earthquake, but in the silence, in stillness. That's very much my experience of God at the moment, that it's in times of stillness that I can feel God's presence as Elijah did and hear his voice. And finally, towards the end of chapter 19, God sends Elijah a companion. He sends him Elisha, who becomes his servant and then his successor as prophet. And I know that one of the ways in which I'm finding God at work for me at the moment is in the gentle ministry of others. People who take the time to ring, someone who makes me a meal, someone who I know is praying for me. I think these stories are well worth looking at in 1 Kings 18 and 19. They show us that God is around us working in all sorts of different ways, perhaps in spectacular ways, maybe in very simple ways that it's easy for us to take for granted. Perhaps you'd like to read those and reflect on them. Perhaps you'd like, as this little reflection ends, you'd like to pray that prayer, that examine prayer, to ask the Holy Spirit to show you those places in your life where God is present to you, helping you, supporting you, encouraging you, to give thanks for those times. And if there are times of darkness, to bring those too into God's presence, to be flooded with his healing power and love.